Thank you. And thank you to all of you who have joined us today. Look, this is a great day and it's a great conversation. And we are anxious for you to meet two really great people. In Home Free USA, many of you may know us already, but for those of you who don't, we have been in the business of working with the mortgage industry for the last 26 years. So we're not new, but we are so happy that the day has come when even our big regulator, our Office of the Comptroller, and our acting comptroller and director will talk to us today about what they're doing. We have to work together to inspire and elevate people, certainly African Americans and people of color in this country. This is what we've been doing in Home Free USA for 25 years. And we are so happy that so many more companies, people, leaders like you are committed to wealth accumulation, corporate diversity, and economic equity, because that's how Black lives will truly matter. So without any further ado, I want to introduce you. If you don't know Andrew Moss, you need to meet Andrew Moss. Andrew directs the Project Reach, which is what we're going to talk about today, a program that's been started by the OCC. Drew is a part of the Home Free USA Advisory Council. He's a mover and a shaker for sure in the mortgage industry, and quite an advocate for the elevation, the financial elevation for people of color and for all people in the country. So without any further ado, allow me, we're going to get the program going. We have a number of opportunities at the end. If you have some questions, send your questions into the chat. So this is going to be a powerful conversation, one for us to learn so that we can earn. May I introduce to you our friend and OCC leader, Andrew Moss.
Well, thank you, Marcia, as always. You know, I guess one thing you left out is that we're also neighbors as well. So
yeah, right.
I would have probably gotten a knock on the door. But it's always good to be a part of Home Free and the efforts that you're putting forth to move the needle on minority home ownership. My role here at the OCC as Director of Minority Outreach is to really look at those opportunities where we can increase the chances or the efforts to get more people engaged in the banking industry, either through some type of employment or either through being a customer or a consumer, moving them away from the challenges of using payday lenders and other like alternative financial services. So I say all that because this is, we know that there's a huge challenge in this country right now. And one of the things that has really sparked a lot of the social unrest is that a lot of people have just not felt connected to the financial mainstream. And that's one of the big things that is the underlying tenet of Project Reach. And you'll hear a little bit more about it. The man who actually came up in the brainchild of this, who is the acting comptroller, Brian Brooks, he's going to talk a lot more about what we're trying to do. But I wanted to just go and give you a little bit more of like the reason why I'm so committed to doing this. And that is during my undergrad years at North Carolina Central, I remember my first business school, and I know I have a lot of Eagles on the line, so I'll say hello and give a shout out to everyone. One thing that during my first class at North Carolina Central in business school, I had a blind professor. He was my marketing 101 professor. And everyone sat down, he took roll, and it was very quiet in the class. And his first statement after he finished calling every name was, the Black community loses an acre of land every day. So, you know, as a 19-year-old, you're thinking like, what does that mean? Like, that doesn't really resonate with someone who's just hanging out as a sophomore in school, in college, who doesn't have any understanding of the importance of property ownership. But as I graduated and got involved with community reinvestment and all these other types of initiatives to help with making sure that the resources are available in communities of color, I understand that more than ever. And I deal with that even on a personal level because I have family members who have sold their property. and given up on generational wealth that has been passed down from year to year. So while I think about that professor being blind, he probably had the most foresight of anyone I've ever met. And because of that, I feel that this is why Project REACH is so important. Project REACH is the roundtable for economic access and change. And what we're trying to do with this initiative at the LCC is to bring together all of the different players and stakeholders to help with addressing some of the structural barriers that have limited the full participation of communities of color and other underserved communities into the economic mainstream. So that is where we are today. Marcia being one of our partners and to help move the home ownership needle. We're happy to have you aboard with Home Free. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marcia. And are you going to introduce Brian, or did you want me to introduce the man?
I'm going to ask you one more question, Drew.
Sure, go ahead.
How did you go, just very quickly, how did you go from North Carolina Central to the OCC?
So, you know, it's funny. My first job out of North Carolina Central was with Moody's Investor Service. They had, and interesting enough, the way that I got that job was because it was a diversity initiative. They had just finished, it was a settlement for discriminatory hiring practices. So they actually combed through all of the business schools at the HBCUs and went on an aggressive hiring campaign. And that opportunity has led me to where I am now. Even though it hasn't been a clear path, I've taken many detours to get to where I am, but this is something that I've always wanted to do. And I'm happy to be here today. But after going through Moody's and becoming a DC public school teacher, and then working with Adidas and some other nonprofits to help with underserved youth around the country, I eventually became a curriculum developer for financial education at a national nonprofit, and then was recruited by the FDIC and the CDFI fund. And now I'm here at the OCC, working with some great people.
That's wonderful, Drew. And if there were three things that sort of character traits, skills, whatever, that sort of that has led you to where you are, that you feel are really required to escalate in life for our business people who are on the phone, but also for our Center for Financial Advancement, HBCU scholars, what would those three things be?
First thing I would tell you is flexibility. Never think that whatever you're planning to do, that's what's going to happen. You always have to have flexibility because you're going to have to make several adjustments in life. The second one, be prepared, because there's something that's going to come up every day that you may not expect it, but always expect the unexpected. And the third thing that I would say is just be persistent. If you quit and you feel like there's something that's going to sidetrack you, then you're not in the right place. You don't have your heart in it. And if you want to make sure that you have the dedication and passion to do whatever it is to accomplish those goals, you will find a way of doing it. And that's what I would say would be the top three things that you need to have as far as making sure you are going to achieve the goals and move the needle and do the things that you need to do to actually help with the communities that we care about. And yourself.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Drew, you've got the heart, you got the passion, and you have the skill. So stay at the OCC. We love what you're doing, and we're going to move forward with you. And I'm just so happy that we have a lot of people on the call today to hear from not only you, but from our acting comptroller, Brian Brooks. So look, let's just move it forward, and we want to bring you back at the end. I'm not sure how you guys are going to tag team this, but we're ready for Brian.
That's all right. Here we go. I'll switch it over to Brian now.
Okay.
Marcia, we're going to tag team on one computer. How are you?
Brian, we are so happy to have you. Look, we want to introduce you to our world of nonprofit, community leaders, HBCU students, bankers, lenders across the board. We are privileged to have you, and we are so honored that you are creating a legacy already at the OCC. When Drew calls me about Project REACH, I said, well, hallelujah. Look, we got something going here. And even the bankers that I have spoken to, Brian, what they mentioned to me was that I asked them, why did they get involved in Project Reach? And the point that they made was that there had never been an opportunity like this before to come together in the OCC to uplift people, uplift companies, and uplift the overall stature of people in our country. So we appreciate you, we appreciate Drew, the OCC. So let's get started. So I want you to start off for a minute to just tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you even get to being a big time acting comptroller of the currency?
Boy, Marcia, I look forward to the day when I don't have to be the big time acting controller. Like all these days, you know, I can really be here. Look,
you will.
So I'll tell you, we all have our long winding road that got us wherever we are, right? But I think mine had a few lessons in it that I'll just kind of describe for you. So I grew up in I like to say I grew up in the 50s. Now you don't look at me and think I'm old enough to grow up in the 50s, but the place I grew up in was the 50s then, and it's basically the 80s now in that.
Yeah.
Right. So I grew up in a small town in southern Colorado that was a factory town. And I'm going to guess a lot of people on the line, you all have a similar story to something like this. There was a time in America where we had good middle-class jobs that didn't require a college degree. And a lot of those jobs revolved around steel mills like my hometown, or auto factories in Detroit and Ohio, or, you know, textile mills in the Northeast, places like that. And in the 70s, those things all died, right? So I had a town of 100,000 people, 20,000 of whom worked at the steel mill, and the rest of whom either were married to or were children of or serviced the people who worked in the steel mill. And in the 70s, that went away. And my hometown has had 20% unemployment ever since then. My hometown has a 13% college graduation rate. The average house price in my hometown is $60,000. My hometown is a majority Hispanic community where Spanish is the primary language of the county. And so I've seen tough stuff. I've seen poverty. I've seen real discrimination. I've seen violence. I've seen a lot of hard things. I was lucky because I had a couple of parents who were very aspirational for their kids, and they got me out of there and got me off to college and law school, and I wound up, you know, going on and having the career that I had. But here's what was really interesting for me, and this is a story that I tell a lot of people, and if we have HBCU students on this call, I want to really emphasize this point. So I came out of law school, I moved to DC, and I worked at a big law firm. My mentor at the law firm, who changed my life, and I'm going to tell you just a quick story about that, was not a middle-aged rich white guy. The mentor that made me who I am today was the legendary Bill Coleman, who was the most important black lawyer of his generation. He was the first African-American Supreme Court clerk. He was the chairman of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for 35 years. He was a member of the Tuskegee Airmen's Legal Defense. And he chose to mentor this guy. And I learned something from that, right? So as I would go to Bill Coleman's house for dinner and he would sit me next to Vernon Jordan, or he would sit me next to Drew Days or Elaine Jones or other leaders of the civil rights community, what I realized is Bill was showing me something, which is your mentor doesn't have to look like you to teach you important lessons. Wisdom doesn't necessarily look like you. Wisdom's based on kindness. It's based on a long perspective. It's based on sort of understanding shared goals. And one of the things I've tried to do in my career a lot is find people who aren't the usual suspects, who didn't go to my fraternity or live in my dorm, to mentor and bring up. And I think if I have any legacy at all, and maybe I'm too young to really have a legacy, it was all about that. So when you fast forward to the OCC, I mean, my career was in banking law, and Bill and I used to work on banking preemption cases and merger cases and things like that together. My belief always was banking is the infrastructure on which wealth is created in this country. And Marcia, I'll tell you one little data point that is the thing that is stuck in my craw for 25 years. And it is this: the entire difference, and I mean, you know this because I think you and I have actually talked about this before, the entire difference between the average household net worth of a black family and the average household net worth of a white family is explained by one thing, and it is the missing value of a single family house, okay? The average white family in America has a net worth of about $175,000. The average black family has a net worth of about $5,000. And the average price of a house in this country is around $170,000. That's what's missing. And so when Andrew and I were talking about launching Project Reach, what we knew we were trying to solve for was, how do we create wealth opportunities that solve that problem? And the issues tend to center around two or three basic things. One is that disproportionately, minorities in the United States don't have a credit score and so can't get a mortgage to buy the house. And houses are too damn expensive. It's those two things together that are the single biggest cause of a wealth gap in this country. And the question is there a structural reason for that and can we fix it? And my passion for being at the OCC all these years, because I'll tell you something, I know about the rest of you, I am in the job I've wanted for my whole career. Not many people ever get that chance, but I happen to be in the job that I've wanted for my entire career. And the reason is because now, if there really are structural inequalities, I control the structure. That's the beauty of what we're doing here. And so when Drew and I organized this group of bankers and tech executives and civil rights leaders to try and fix this stuff, the whole thinking was, we can do this from the OCC because we're in charge of the rules and regulations that govern finance in this country. And if we can figure out the things that are barring people from access to home ownership and wealth creation, we can actually fix that. So I'm going to stop talking because I know we're having a dialogue here, but that's my short life story in 7 minutes.
Oh, look, I tell you, my heart expands in hearing your story. Brian, talk to us just for a minute here about why Project Reach is more important today than ever. And how do you define success for Project Reach?
Well, so here's how it's important and it's possible for one particular reason, which is, business cycles come and go, the economy goes up and down, social justice movements come and then they wane. And the problem historically has been that the business community responds to these cycles with short-term commitments, okay? They say, oh my goodness, there's a march on Washington, we need to make a $2 million grant to the NAACP to show that we're on board. And then next year there's no march and there's no donation and we kind of get on with our lives. And these are one-time blips and they don't mostly change anything, Giving a man a fish doesn't mostly change anything. The thinking this time was, as I watched the protest marches go down the street, literally right outside of my front door, what I was most struck by was the constant refrain about structural inequality. And that word means something. Structural doesn't mean really, really bad. It means non-transient. It's based on a rule or a social structure or something that is preventing people from having access to something. And so my thought was, instead of doing another one of these things where this time, but not next time, we'll just encourage banks to donate some money, maybe this time we could actually change the structures. You know what I mean? And so the things we're working on here are designed to be permanent changes, not one-time changes. So for example, on this bit about 45 million people not having a credit score and that group of people being disproportionately Black and Hispanic, we could actually build a credit score that would capture their creditworthiness and thus solve that problem. Because the reason 45 million people don't have a credit score, Marcia, is that in this country, it literally takes money to make money. You can't get a credit score unless you've already had credit.
That's right.
Isn't that crazy? So for the 20-year-olds on this call who maybe you're new to this, think about it. You can't have a credit score unless you already have credit. How are you supposed to build credit if you didn't already have? I mean, it's Kafka-esque. So the answer is, we know there are a lot of people who don't have credit who are nonetheless paying their rent on time every month. And we can see income flowing through their bank accounts because, after all, we are the banking regulator. We can see them paying their electric bill and their gas bill and their cell phone bill and their Netflix bill, none of which gets captured in their credit report. If we can synthesize a credit score based on those payments, which are no less predictive than your payments of your credit card bill and your mortgage, we can bring all those 45 million people into the credit system like that. And the fact that people have been talking about this for 30 years, but it takes this moment to fix it, is both infuriating and super exciting. So we're going to fix it. And Marcia, we're going to fix it in October, not in 9 months or 20 years. We're going to fix it in October.
Well, look, this is what we need. This is what we need, Brian. And let me just, before I ask another question, and we have just a lot of people who want to ask, well, make statements to you and Andrew and ask questions. Let me just say that in addition to everything that you've said, which is on target, what we have found from a nonprofit perspective, people need down payment money. Even if their credit is good and we can, get the credit score and everything intact, get them paying, they need down payment money in order to buy. So I know this is something that you guys are working on. This is absolutely critical. And also outreach to our homeowners, our home buyers, to let them know that people like them, despite wherever they are today, they have bought, they can buy, and this is the opportunity. So we appreciate everything that you're doing. One more question from me for you. I want you to finish this. More banks need to blank. How would you end that?
More banks need to serve more people, Marcia. My mantra has always been more credit, less poverty. There's lots and lots of evidence for that. And I do think one of the things we need to get comfortable with as a society, and this is politically controversial, not everybody agrees with this, but all these studies show this, which is in our country, it's risk capital that creates wealth. And so to make it possible for somebody, even somebody who's had a ding on their credit, to get a loan, because it's the loan that allows them to start a business or go to college or buy the car that they need to get to work or whatever. And those are the things that create wealth in this country. And I think one of the problems we've got as a society right now is we've sort of decided that risk is bad, or maybe even credit is bad. I mean, I hear that in different quarters. But let me tell you something. If you look back at prior generations, if I think about my great-grandfather, who was the immigrant generation in my family, who had no education at all and who came here fleeing the pogroms in Russia and worked in the steel mill in that little town I told you about, he had to take out a loan to buy a little tiny junk wagon, which turned out to be his business, which is how he left the steel mill and made a little bit of money to buy his first house. Letting people take a risk on themselves and letting the financial sector support that is how you build wealth. And if we get to a world where we no longer believe in lending and credit, then it's going to be hard for anybody else to come into the system. And what I worry about is the people who tend to criticize finance tend to be the richest people, weirdly. They tend to not be comfortable with poor people like my family taking on loans because it somehow offends their sensibilities. But what I know is it was loans at 8% interest that allowed me to go to college, which then allowed me to become a lawyer, which then allowed me to buy a house, which then allowed me to run the OCC. And if I couldn't have taken out those loans because the 8% interest rate offended somebody's sensibilities on Capitol Hill, I wouldn't be here today. So I believe in people being able to raise themselves up. The way you put it, Marcia, learning to earn, 100%.
Well, look, how open, Brian, how open are banks, the banks that you regulate and the banks that you guys have approached to this whole idea? I mean, we know after George Floyd, there is an awareness that we've never had in this country. But I can tell you where minority communities are concerned, and particularly the Black community, there is some hesitation about really feeling that these banks are open, they're willing, they're really trying to do the right thing. Some people are just now, they're still trying to sort of get themselves together after the last foreclosure crisis. The home buyers are concerned about really why are these banks denying more Black people, in particular Black and brown people, than they are approving. So how open are the banks to the work that you're presenting to them now, and why should they be open?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of thoughts about that. So the first is, as with all people, some are more open than others, to be quite honest. And, without naming names, I will say that I invited a number of banks to be in Project Reach. And some of those banks said, Brian, we just made a big financial commitment and we got a lot of other things going on. Please don't get us mired in yet another detour over here. Some, to me, their primary regulator, okay? And others called me up and said, we're 100% in, sign us up. And that's why you see the kind of companies that you see, is that as on anything, some people like ice cream and some people don't like ice cream. Some people wanted to support this and some people are slower. What I think we will achieve here is we're going to create something I learned a lot about Silicon Valley, which is we're going to create a lot of FOMO, right? So you're going to see some amazing press in the next couple of months on 3 giant issues: credit scores, affordable home ownership. And by the way, to your point about people in the Black community not feeling well served by banks, I bring you our third thing in Project Reach, which is we're going to revitalize minority deposit institutions in ways that nobody's thought of in a long, long time, because we believe that one of the big problems in minority financial services is the lack of trust that large banks are out there looking for their interests. And there is a trust building role that MDIs play in the ecosystem of showing that, hey, we come out of your community, we live in your community, we lend to your community. We're not the big bank in New York, we're here for you. And at the OCC, we recognize that those kinds of institutions matter, not just for their signaling effect, but for their actual delivery of services. I mean, you mentioned we have a bunch of HBCU students on the call here. Why do we still have HBCUs years after the Ivy League desegregated? Everybody on the call knows the answer to that. It's because these organizations are important, not just historically.
That's right.
They're the entry point for whole communities into a better life. And it's the same thing with minority deposit institutions. So we're going to fix that as well inside of Project Reach. Like, we get that message.
One last point, and I know I'm going to turn it over to Gwen in a minute. Brian and Andrew and everyone at the OCC. Guys, if you all can instill a need for the counseling organizations, a desire for among our homeowners and home buyers to some degree, our home buyers and our homeowners. Look, the role that we play, meaning organizations like Home Free USA and many of the organizations that are on the phone right now, we serve these financial institutions in a way where we have our hands on people who are not quite ready, but want to buy. People who are thinking about home ownership, but just are stuck and they just need some help. So your encouragement, your push, your requirement with whatever you do, if you could require or really encourage counseling preparation, let me tell you, this is the thing that's going to make a long-term benefit, certainly in the Black community. We've got to work together. People have to be prepared so that they can be approved. We want to limit these denials in the Black community. So our job is to ensure that when a home buyer goes to your lending partners, a bank that you regulate, that they get approved. This is the fervor with which a positiveness that we have to incorporate in our community, and we need you guys to be supportive with us and encouraging.
100%. Marcia, can I tell you one controversial thing about that before we move on to Gwen?
Please.
So if you think about technology just for a moment, there was a time when you bought a computer or a TV set or even early cell phones, and they used to come with these big, thick instruction manuals. You remember that? You'd take the computer out of the box. There'd be a big instruction manual, and if you wanted to figure out how to set the time, you had to flip back to page R32, and it would have a 7-step process, and you needed a lot of counseling to operate that device. And then Steve Jobs came along, and he started building products that were so simple and so intuitive that they didn't come with an instruction manual. You could just figure it out because they were so easy. So I would tell you, for sure, you cannot navigate, especially as a first-time home buyer, and especially if you're someone who came out of a community of renters. So you might be the first one in your family to do this. You can't do this without housing counseling, and you'd probably be crazy to try.
Good.
On the other hand, I think we'd all agree that wouldn't it be great if we could get to a place where this was so simple and easy and intuitive that eventually the complexity no longer necessitated all of that learning, because not everybody has the time or inclination to learn. So what I want to do is really work on two fronts. One is, as we start, innovating new structures of mortgages to make it easier for people to get in, they're going to need your help, right? And we're going to say things that will direct them to housing counseling firms like you. But my hope is that we can also get to a place where it is not a process of signing 800 pages of documents with legalese that nobody can possibly understand, with interest rate resets and this and that. I would love to get to a world where buying a house is simple, kind of like opening up your MacBook, where you don't need the instruction manual. So let's work together to get to that place, and then everybody will be able to be in the system. That's the goal.
Well, look, it's about being simple. Everybody wants quick. They want things made easy, and we all need partnerships. So we just appreciate partnering with the OCC and all of the banks that you're going to bring to the table. Gwen, I know I've seen a lot of questions in our chat. I know we have other panelists that just want to say a few words. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Marcia. And please put your questions in the chat, and we will get to, I'm going to going to combine some of them because they're kind of overlapping, and then we'll get to the other people around 1:45. So, Brian, I'm going to start out with a question from me. Where can individuals go to find more information about Project REACH if they want to do their own research?
So people can go to, and I think I'm going to get the website right. It's occ.gov/reach. How easy is that?
That's really easy. So everyone, you can go there and learn more. You can see who the founding committee members are. I love that you said it's civil rights organizations, banks as well. So that's key, especially people who are closer to the ground working with the people. So first question, what are you doing to bring awareness to communities and businesses about Project REACH? And are you both open to speaking about Project REACH organizations in a Zoom meeting? If so, how can they contact you to set up a time to do that?
Hey, Gwen, I feel like Andrew might have given you a bunch of softball questions. Right?
Don't worry, that is coming.
Questions. These are the questions I would ask. Okay, so I'm gonna blow everybody's mind. So is everybody sitting down?
Yep, roll it.
Okay. I have been traveling the country, even in coronavirus, giving speeches and holding workshops on this. I just got back from Denver just last week, where I convened a group of about 50 bankers and community leaders and others talking about the way that Project REACH and also our new Community Reinvestment Act rule will incentivize and encourage lending in Native American communities, which is a big part of our focus. I mean, talk about a neglected community that nobody talks about. We went and had a whole workshop on that just last Friday. About a month ago, Senator Tim Scott and I co-hosted an event in Charleston, South Carolina, on the same thing, focused on looking at opportunity zones as a way of investing in historically disinvested communities. We had a great discussion about the lending structure that allowed the National African American Museum that is in Charleston, one of the most important slavery monuments in the United States, to the history of the slave trade, and how that kind of thing can revitalize communities when financed the right way. So the bottom line is, as Drew knows, unlike most people, I don't turn away speaking invitations. If you've got a conference you want me to be at, I'm available.
All right, I know this crew will take you up on it. When you think timeline for you just starting to work, what do you envision as a timeline? Is this multi-year, multi-month? Talk to me.
No. This is shock and awe. You know, we don't have time for this stuff to happen later. And I say that because honestly, I think we're at a really challenging inflection point. If I were to say politically, it would almost sound like it's just because it's an election year. I don't think it's that. I think that for the first time in my lifetime, there are significant numbers of people who are actually questioning the viability of our basic system of democratic capitalism. I mean, I think people are really saying, hey, maybe capitalism has failed. And so my view is, if I'm going to be the defender of markets, if I actually do believe that free markets have lifted more people out of poverty in the last 20 years than any other single force, I've probably got 3 months to prove that. So no, this is not a multi-year program. When I say we're going to solve the problem of credit scores in October, I don't mean next October. Okay, I mean in about 45 days, we're going to come out with an announcement that says, hey, to the 45 million people who don't have credit scores, we've solved your problem. You can now apply for a mortgage and you'll get considered. Now, I can't guarantee everybody will get a mortgage because some of those people don't pay their rent on time, and that will have an effect. But they will now be in the system, and we will have millions more people getting mortgages than are getting them today, and that'll happen in a month or two, okay? The affordable housing issue, where we are working on a fundamentally reimagined way of financing houses, where instead of having a 20% down payment or having to pay private mortgage insurance, we'll have a structure where you can make 5% down and have an equity investor come in between you and your 80% mortgage that you don't have to repay. It's not debt. And we'll announce that in the next 60 days. It turns out, guys, this isn't that hard. It's just that nobody's ever made it a priority. And so the great thing about having your hands on the structure is if it's important to you, you can actually fix it. So for those of you on the call, again, I'm speaking to all the students here, if I could shape some hearts and minds for a moment. For those of you who are thinking about your careers, find a career where you can actually do something, and don't sit in the seat, but do something with it. These aren't that hard. It's just nobody's ever cared enough. And this team cares.
I love shock and awe. And it's funny, 20 years ago, I spoke in front of Congress about alternative credit, the stuff we're talking about now. And it's just happening.
That was 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago.
What did you say?
I said it was 20 years ago. That's a travesty. You had to wait 20 years to have your message heard.
Exactly. How will you measure success? How do you know this is working? I mean, what are your early benchmarks?
Well, so we have a number of things that will constitute success. So the first thing is we have sort of three things inside of Project Reach. I'll just go through them quickly. So on the MDI front, on the minority deposit institutions front, we're going to roll out a Project Reach pledge. The pledge is going to become a model for what we expect of big banks. We're going to expect big banks to essentially adopt one or more minority deposit institutions and to make certain commitments to that institution. And those will not only be financial. Yes, we will expect capital commitments, but we will also expect management training programs and executive exchange programs. We'll expect business flow in both directions between the big bank and the MDI to make them successful. And success will be when we've got 10, 20, 50 banks signing the pledge. All the Project Reach banks will sign the pledge. That's part of Project Reach. But once Citigroup and Wells Fargo have signed the pledge, can it be that long before Bank of America signs the pledge or US Bank signs the pledge? We think there's going to be a lot of FOMO. So on MDIs, the more banks sign the pledge, the more effective we will have been. So that would be one idea. On the credit score issue, what I want to see is, and this is just incremental increases in the number of loans being made to people who last year didn't have a credit score. That should show up in origination numbers for African American and Hispanic loan applicants. So Marcia, your clients should be the ones directly benefiting from this. You talk about people being rejected for loans. Some of those people are being rejected for loans because they have a thin file or don't have a credit score at all. None of those people in the future should be rejected for that reason. They should be considered on their merits. And we would expect that of the 45 million people, some number of hundreds of thousands or millions of them will now get loans. So incremental increases in the number of minority homeowners made possible by mortgage credit will be the measure of our success. And then on the issue of these soft, what I call these soft seconds, this equity piece of loan originations, the incremental number of low down payment loans made will be the measure of success. There had been low down payment programs a couple years ago, 3 years ago, Marcia, when you and I were on the Affordable Housing Advisory Council together, Fannie Mae had a program for that. That program got canceled about a year ago and doesn't exist anymore. But imagine if I was, able in my current role to allow banks to do 5% down payment loans with no private mortgage insurance because there's an equity piece in between them and the mortgage. That would bring a lot more people back in who don't have generational wealth to plow into their house. So each of those things can be metricized and measured.
Another question, Brian, can you work with banks to provide small mortgage loans, i.e. 150,000 or less?
It's a great point. That's not something that we've specifically focused on in this project, but I'm very familiar with the issue. I mean, back when I was a lawyer and probably when Drew was at NCRC, that was an issue that we used to go back and forth on, was are big banks not doing small mortgages? So I hear you on that. It's a good call out. It's something we need to look at.
Yeah, that's questions come up several times.
Yeah.
Will lending opportunities expand to small businesses and nonprofits?
Well, so I come back to my more credit, less poverty concept. Small business lending is a business line that some banks are in more than others. Nonprofit lending is a subset of that some banks are more into than others. This is one of those things where I'd love to have dialogue about what people are seeing in the marketplace. And, what I would tell you is one of the reasons that this Paycheck Protection Program loan, initiative under the CARES Act was so hard to roll out was not that many banks are in small business lending today. That was something I hadn't really focused on until the PPP program got announced. But suddenly we had all these banks trying to roll out those dollars, but they weren't plugged into the Small Business Administration's loan system. And so they had to figure it out from scratch. That does tell me there's a problem. So I come back to first principles. Like, am I an expert on SBA lending? No. But I grew up in a town that, other than the steel mill, consisted of nothing but small local shops, small restaurants. I mean, there were no chain stores in my town. It wasn't big enough for that. It was all about local chamber of commerce and small business. So if there are not enough opportunities for entrepreneurs to lift themselves up, that's a problem. Only last point I'd make on that, Gwen, is in our Community Reinvestment Act rule, one of the things we're specifically targeting is entrepreneurship. The idea is to allow people to raise themselves up and build wealth by starting businesses. I really do believe that societies where more people own things is a better society. So homeowners are more satisfied with their lives than renters, is what data shows. And business owners are more satisfied with their lives than employees, evidence shows. When you're in charge of your own life, it's usually because you own things. So we need more people, including more minorities, owning businesses, owning stocks, owning houses, not just being treated as though they're guests of the power structure.
Great.
One last question, and then we have a couple other people to bring in. How is this going to impact college student loan debt? Because that is something that can really jack up your credit.
It is. I think the whole student loan conundrum really is sort of, it's a complicated question in a whole bunch of ways. So, part of it is, I think we have created incentives that may not actually be in the interests of like all of the relevant stakeholders in the system. So I'll just, and again, some of what I'm going to say is controversial, so I recognize that. But I think the idea that there should be federally subsidized student loan interest rates, regardless of like what your major is or whatever. I mean, we took a lot of people who in my day and like in my town would have gone and they would have gone into a skilled trade and they would have made a lot of money and owned their own business. And we instead incentivized them to go get a mass communications degree at the local college in my hometown. And those people are now waiting tables. They do have a degree, it's true, but their economic well-being is probably less good than it would have been had they not been subsidized to do this instead of that. So I think, there are issues of how should you think about subsidized student loan credit. At the same time, it's clear that we have crushing debt burden on millions of students who can't possibly pay it back and need some sort of relief. So what the right solution is, I don't know. I think it's some kind of mix of, we ought to provide more information to young kids. And I have one kid who just graduated from college and another is in college now. So I'm kind of like a consumer of this at the moment. I think we need to give people better information about the employment rates and the first year earnings, and the median earnings of various career tracks they're looking at so they can be intelligent about, is it worth borrowing $100,000, $200,000, for this education or not, versus other opportunities I have. And I think the other thing we need to do as a society, and this goes beyond your question, but I think it's related, is we need to destigmatize trades and other kinds of things where people can make money and transmit wealth. I mean, I wouldn't be here today, but for my uneducated great-grandfather and my grandfather who had an 8th grade education who worked in a furniture store. I don't believe that their lives were not worthy of respect. I couldn't be here today if they didn't make money and do those trades so the next generation could do better. And I know that we all believe in the next generation doing better. So we need to find a way to show that that's still possible.
Brian, it's interesting, my parents and their generation had trades, and that's how the Black community was sustained because we couldn't get a seat at the table, and the trades is so we need to get back to some of that. All right, so there's a couple of you on, guys, I'm sorry, I won't get to everybody's question. There's a couple of people I want to bring on who are going to make just some quick hellos, and Paul, I'm going to start with you, Paul Coaches, and then I have 3 others to get to as well.
Of course.
Paul?
Hi, Gwen. Thanks.
Hi.
Brian, I
This
gotta say,
is one of those, this is your life kind of moments. I mean, this is.
you were absolutely made for this job. Okay, look, I am so delighted to be anywhere close to the stage where Brian Brooks is presenting on any subject. Okay, but particularly these subjects of importance, affordable housing. We've been working together on this for years. Financial inclusion.
I'm afraid it might be decades at this point, Paul. Just so everyone understands how selfish Paul's statement is. He's saying all these things because Paul more or less trained me. So we can just go with that understanding.
Oh, gosh. No, it was quite the opposite. You demonstrated leadership right from the outset of the mortgage crisis, all throughout the mortgage meltdown. It was just wonderful to be in the trenches with you, doing what we could do at the time through loan modifications and principal write-downs and supporting HAMP and TALF and TARP and all the programs. So
yeah.
It comes as absolutely no surprise to me that you are now heading up yet another potentially transformational government initiative with this Project Reach. And I just want to assure you, myself, along with my colleagues, I know Steve Nesmith, there's a blast from the past, is on this webinar as well. Marcia, everybody at Home Free, and the other civil rights groups that we've been working with, we're all committed to helping you ensure that Reach actually does reach the intended communities who've been underserved and help them access capital and credit. Look, I'm going to leave you with this hopefully inspirational vignette. As a constitutional scholar and student of federalism, I would bet a cookie at least that when you were looking at taking the position comptroller of the currency, that you recognized that the position was actually created by Abraham Lincoln to fund, that little government undertaking to ensure equal rights and wipe out slavery known as the Civil War. And so, Brian, not to put any undue pressure on you, but I'm sure everybody on the phone and attending this webinar is absolutely certain that you will have similar success with Project Reach. And we are here to help. So just show us the way, Brian, please.
Thank you, Paul.
So hey, Marcia, let me just comment and say, the problem with moments like this is you realize that like you owe your friend a note from 2 days ago, and then you put a national webinar. So that's a classic of the genre. But on the Abraham Lincoln comment, let me just say, we are acutely aware every day of our history here. And Paula, it's not just financing the Civil War in 1863, but it was just after the Civil War where the OCC chartered the Freedmen's Bank, which is one of the great stories, and then worked on the resolution of the Freedmen's Bank when scam artists, tried to take it down. So that this is really part of the agency's DNA. And right around that corner there is the original signed copy of the National Currency Act, signed by A. Lincoln from the original 1863 era. So we're very cognizant of the DNA. Thank you for your support. That means more of coming from you than just about anybody.
Pleasure.
Good.
So I want to bring up next, and while he's coming on screen, say the website again, Brian, because we're still getting a lot of questions, and Shakira or Francis, put it in the chat as well.
Great. Yes.
Our next speaker, our person who's going to say hello is Dean Anthony Nelson, the Dean of the Business School at North Carolina Central University. So Dean Nelson, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gwen. Well, first of all, I want to thank you and Marcia for giving me the opportunity to make just a few comments and remarks. The one word can really sum it up after hearing Brian, and that's wow. This is fantastic. I also want to say that, on behalf of the faculty, staff, and students here at North Carolina Central University School of Business, we are extremely proud of Andrew Moss, who graduated from our School of Business. He's one of the many business eagles who has soared to higher heights, and we're just proud of him and Project Reach, just we know that he's going to be successful with that, as well as Brian. So we're so proud of him. We're going to feature you, Andrew, in one of our upcoming newsletters, so we'll be in touch with you. And I also want to say congratulations to you, Brian, on your new role as controller of the currency of that office. And based on your background and what I heard here, I'm just confident that you're going to promote policies and programs that are sensitive to the needs of a diverse workforce, and you're going to seek to hire those individuals with diverse skills and backgrounds and leverage those unique talents and viewpoints of others to enhance your office. So, I'm just greatly appreciative of you, and congratulations again. And let me say that I'm also proud to have one of the Home Free USA Centers for Financial Empowerment located here at North Carolina Central University. It's a great center that has had tremendous impact on our students. One of our students, as a result of the program, was able to purchase a home with their mother as a direct result of participating in the Home Free USA program. And I also, I heard through the grapevine that your office, Brian, is going to have several students from Home Free USA working as interns this summer. And I just know that your organization is just a glowing example of what other organizations can do to develop internship programs and to develop a talent pipeline that will increase the trajectory of the workforce. So, and especially your office. So in closing, I'll just say, thank you again for all that you're doing, Brian. Thank you, Marcia, for all that you're doing through Home Free USA. And I also want to say that I wish everyone, especially the students on the line, the very best as they pursue opportunities like Home for USA and opportunities through the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. So thank you, Marcia. And,
Thank you.
Dean
Well,
Nelson.
so I just want to chime in, Dean Nelson, and say that, there's a famous old Ronald Reagan line about how it's amazing what you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit. This is one of the things where, I've got sitting to my right a guy who has never cared one whit about credit. He just delivers every day. And, he's not the only North Carolina Central alum that we have in senior roles at the OCC. So there's something in the water down there, I would just say, generating smart, wise, thoughtful leaders. But I'm happy to be the beneficiary of that. So thank you for what you do.
Oh, you're welcome. We know how to feather the nest so that our eagles can soar when they leave.
It's all about the pipeline.
There you go.
So I'm surprised from Andrew or Dean. I haven't heard Eagle Pride. What's up, guys?
Oh, I'm going to give you that. You know the story.
All right. Thank you.
I tell you all the time, you know the story. Tell the whole wide world this is Eagle territory.
There you go.
Yeah, that's good.
Eagle
All right.
Pride amplified.
There you go. You got others listening. So last couple of people, then we're going to begin to wrap up. Bruce Palin, would you come on, and Nick, one of our HBCU students, and then I have some final comments. So Bruce, are you there?
I am, and thank you very much. And we completely agree that a critical thing to building wealth in this country and to addressing some of the wealth disparities for especially Black families is homeownership. And I mean, there's a 30 percentage point difference between Black and white home ownership, and we've really lost a lot of ground in the last 10 years, so very important things. And I have to say, as housing advocates in the community, I'm sure you know, we've been very concerned about some of the changes to the Community Reinvestment Act, and we think it's some of the things that we thought local targeting did specialized programs that really did get to address these issues in local ways. So we're very concerned about that. We're glad you're working on the kinds of projects you're working on. And I want to sort of share two thoughts with you. And they both wrap around housing counseling as a tool to help achieve what your goals are. And I think what broad people on this call are looking for. So one is that when housing counselors work with families, education is obviously very valuable, but it's also a deep dive into their finances. It's essentially very similar to what underwriters do. And one of the big problems we have and we see in the field is the rejection rates for people of color, especially for Black applicants. And one of the flaws, I think, in credit scoring and that model is it's good that you're bringing more elements of information in, and that's very helpful to this piece. Certainly credit scores don't capture everything. But the other thing is it's basically an averaging device. And what the studies continue to show is that while certainly it is predictive that some people will default on their loans, the majority of people don't default on their loans in that. And so having more specialized ability to do a deeper dive is critical to this. And it's really not recognized in the underwriting process among banks. And if we can capture the ability of counseling agencies to provide a much more in-depth piece to this, we will be able to bring more people into the system. And similarly, it turns out that in any year, 2/3 of the people who come to housing counseling are people of color. So last year was 43% were Black families coming in, and that is a tremendous resource. And the ability and reach of groups like Home for USA to reach people who are not your typical buyers and who are not necessarily, basically it's a trust relationship there. This is completely underused in the world. And so, I mean, underused and also underfunded. And one of the big challenges here is that we need to figure out how to get housing counseling to be more deeply integrated, more properly sustained. And during the foreclosure crisis, if you went to a housing counselor, you were much more likely to get a loan modification. It would have been deeper, and you were much more likely to not lose your house through foreclosure.
So Bruce.
All happening right now. So I'm just encouraging you to think of that as a critical element.
Good, Bruce.
Couldn't agree more.
So last person before Nick comes on, and so the website was one, And if individuals want to contact you, as you said, could you speak to anyone, who should they reach out to?
Well, what I'm going to suggest is, so I've got people who, keep my calendar to make sure that I don't triple book myself and make sure I can actually show up. And I'm just going to guess that maybe Andrew is the right guy to sort of intake these requests. Andrew and I generally fly around together. That's how I make sure I only go to the garden spots, as I know that he's got his own self-interest to think about. So I would suggest that, Andrew will be a good filter, and I think you have his contact, so you can maybe pass that out to the participant. Yeah. On the REACH website, again, it's occ.gov/reach.
Okay. All right. And then one thing, and I see a lot of questions about making sure the frontline organizations are involved. And when I looked at your list, there are several. But if individuals want to get involved or learn more, they can reach out to Andrew. And one thought that I had, it would be interesting as you make progress, because I love the word shock and awe, that there's some updates on your website about what's happening, what progress is being made, and how, what's coming up next. Just the thought, that's the project manager in me. So Nicholas Whiteside, I want to introduce, who is one of our first students we met at Fisk University, our Center for CFA Scholar. And Nick is now a senior at Fisk, but he's also working with the director. So Nick, would you please come on and share a few words, and I'm going to close us out.
So hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Whiteside, and I am a senior at the illustrious Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, and I am one of the first CFA scholars when Marcia and Gwen came to kick off the program in 2017. On behalf of the students of the Center for Financial Advancement program, I wanted to say thank you for your support for Home Free USA, as well as the CFA program. Last semester, the OCC extended an offer for 6 to 10 interns to come to the OCC and work. For us as scholars, there was a huge step forward as we look toward a future where we will one day see someone like an HBCU student or someone who looks like us in your seat, Mr. Brooks. So for now, we look at people like Mr. Moss in admiration because he's a living example of what I just said, but also we want to hope that your office will provide another 6 to 10 opportunities for CFA scholars to come to the office to not only intern, but to also mentor you, Mr. Brooks and Mr. Moss, on what we've learned so that we can all move toward that better future that you talked about earlier. So again, thank you so much for your support and your very, very encouraging words. As a student, I look forward to a future with you in it.
Well, Nick, I couldn't appreciate those words more. I'll just tell you a couple of very, very quick things because I know we're about out of time. But I would say, first of all, in the middle of a pandemic, when many other government agencies canceled their intern programs, we onboarded their interns to make sure that those students had the experience that they signed up to do. I mean, we believe in that here, and I'm not sure why there were other agencies that, were closing up shop, but we were committed to making that work, and we did. And I'll just tell you the other story about my very first day in this job that I currently hold, which is kind of a cool story. So there's a tradition in Washington where the people who are departing an office typically leave a little envelope in their desk with a little word of wisdom to their successor. Presidents historically have done that, and so have controllers. So I walked into my office one day, and this office to me does have a lot of ghosts. I've been in this office going back generations of people who led this agency. So to be able to sit at that desk and see Hugh McCullough's stand-up desk and everything was a little bit chill, I don't know, chill down your spine kind of a moment. I opened the drawer and there was this envelope. So I opened it up and there were 2 pieces of paper in it. One was a short note from my predecessor, just, encouraging me to do a great job and remember how important this job is and everything, which was nice. And then the second piece of paper was a photocopy of a letter that one of our high school interns had sent him the previous year, talking about how because of her summer at the OCC, and this was a young African-American woman from Southeast DC, she had decided she could go to college. She never thought she could until she came and did this internship, but she learned certain things about herself and certain things about the world. And anyway, Joseph, my predecessor, left that for me so that I would understand how important this stuff is. And believe me, I do get it.
Well, one thing I will say is that high school student is now a college student and hopefully at an HBCU, so she can become a CFA scholar and come to the OCC through our program.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Nick. Andrew, what is your email? And then we have to close because we're trying to honor people's time. What is your email address?
It's andrew.moss, M-O-S-S, at occ.treas.gov.
Thank you very much. Guys, this has been, I've learned a lot, and I'm excited about the work that's to come and the results, because the shock and awe, those two words are still stuck in my head, Brian. So I'm really shock and awe.
That's the new. That's going to be the new Project Reach mantra.
Kira, please put up the last slide as we close out. And I just want to thank all of our attendees. We've had a very good number of people on, lots of questions that have flowed. You see in the chat Andrew's information, and he gave it over the screen. But I'm you guys for your commitment to diversity. And you know, sometimes that is said so much that people don't believe it. What I hear is that it sounds real. Wealth accumulation is a real deal issue, and economic equity, and that's what will make the difference in all of the unrest that we're dealing with now, because together we can really make Black lives really matter and show that we're serious about it. So thank you for your outreach and your influence in the community. And Drew, we know it's from you, from Homegrown, and Brian, with you telling your story about where you started, it's clear. It's a passion, but also it's work for you, but you're gonna get some results. And so anyone that wants to follow up with us, you'll see on the screen, you can reach out to M. Griffin at homefreeusa.org, and you see the phone number there, 855-493-4002. If you want to follow up with us, and look forward to more informative sessions like this. We'll be kicking off September 10th. Stay tuned. But thank you again, Brian and Andrew. It's been awesome. And to all of our other guests that were on. And with that, guys, it is a wrap. We're 2 minutes over. Thank you for your. Bye.
Everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great.